Hi, this is Kevin Trainer. Welcome to part one of my tutorial on the coding assignment for deployment. And in part one, we're going to do the first of several parts in which we're going to get ready to deploy. Uh, Up until now, we've had a project that only had to function in the development environment. In our case, it's in the PyCharm development environment. And we're looking at the project here. This is in the state after the last of the coding assignments. And if I start up the server, I've already started up the server, so let's look at the app. So we've got the full app. Okay. It looks like I've already been in here, so the scheduler's already logged in. Let me log a scheduler out, and let's, for instance, log the clerk in, and they can see, but they cannot do. These are all the things we had before. So that's where things are. So I've got a fully functional application, plenty of test data. Okay, I've got these test instructors. I've got these test students. I've got some test courses and sections. Maybe the courses and the sections and the semesters are real data, which means when I go into production, I would want that kind of data in my database. But certainly, the test instructors and the test students are not. We're not going to want a bunch of phony instructors and students in the production version of our system. So we're going to have to address that. Okay, so what's the first thing that we're going to do here in part one? Well, one really important part of what controls our configuration of our running Django environment is the settings.py file. Okay, so if we go over and look at our project, we have the course info app that has its own directory. Okay, then we have the app for a project. We have the directory for a project overall. We're calling ours our last name, our first name, Easy University. And in it, it has a dunder init.py, so it can be treated as a Python module. We've got settings.py, urls.py, wizkey.py, which we haven't done a lot with. Okay, so the settings is where we're going to start. Okay, we've got one settings file. Okay, and it's got a couple of aspects to it that are kind of interesting. Okay, one aspect, what kind of things might be different in the settings between production and development? Okay, well, one is that you can see in the comments right here, this debug equal true is something that we only want to do for development. Okay, so we need to turn this off when we get to production. Okay, so that's going to be a difference. Okay, what other things might be different? Okay, well, our templates are probably going to be in the same spot. We might be using another database. Okay, now in our course in the current semester, we're not going to deploy to a live database, a fully functional relational database like MySQL. We just don't have the time to do this and get our projects done. But when it becomes time to do that, the setting for databases would be different. It wouldn't be pointing to this SQLite 3 database. It would be pointing, for instance, to a MySQL database. So it's possible that your settings for development might point to an SQLite 3 database, and your settings for production might point to a MySQL database or a Postgres database. Okay. What other things have to change? Well, up here we have this thing called allowed hosts. Okay. This is a list of the places where your Django apps can be installed. Okay, so if this thing is being served by a particular host, that host has to be on this list, unless debug equal true. If debug equal true, it doesn't check the list. So we haven't populated the list yet. Okay? So several differences that we need to account for. So how are we going to do this? Well, instead of having just one settings.py file, we're going to have three. We're going to create a directory called settings. Okay, and that's going to be in the same place. So we have the settings.py file in the directory for our project. So instead of just having settings.py, we're going to have a directory called settings. Let's do that. So we're going to right click, say we want a new directory, and we're just going to call it settings. Okay, good. And this is another directory that we want Python to treat as a Python module, like the modules that we've been importing into our own programs that are part of the Django distribution. No, the Python distribution. Well, some from the Django distribution as well, I guess. Okay, so to do that, you have to put a file in there called dunder init.py. So let's just do that. We're going to say we want a new Python file, and we're going to dunder this name, init. We don't put the .py because the kind is what puts the .py on it. Okay, and we have an empty file, and there are things that you can do in these programs, but you don't have to do anything at all. And for our purposes, we don't want to do anything at all. So we just want to make sure when we look at settings that we have that there, and that's great. All right, so what's going to go into settings? Well, we're going to create a hierarchy of settings files. And what we're going to do is the one that has the base kind of settings is going to be called base.py. So let's do this. Let's take settings.py as it currently is and pull it into the settings directory. Okay. All right, so now we've got settings.py in settings. And we're just going to call this the base settings file. So we're going to refactor, rename, and instead of settings, we're going to call it base. And it's a base in the sense that we're going to have things that import it and use all the base settings. Okay, good. Now, what other versions do we want to have? Well, we want to have one for development, and we want to have one for production. Okay, let's do this. So let's create a new Python file, and let's call it development.py, and that's going to go right in there with base. Okay, and we want another one, a new Python file, and we're going to call it production. Does that make sense? There we go, right there. All right, so what do we want in these? Well, we're not going to change a whole lot of different things, okay, in our situation, but this framework is going to serve us well over time. Okay, so let's I was looking at my already baked version. So here, I'm going to close all the things I'm currently editing so that we know what I'm working on. And I'm going to edit development.py. Okay. And what I want to make sure is when I do the refactoring, right, I want to make sure when we're trying to do development that it's behaving the way that it behaved when we began this part one. Okay. I don't want it to break anything. Okay. So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, we have to import things from the base. So we say from .base, that's the base file in our directory, import everything, import asterisk. Okay. And then let's say, what do we want to be different? Well, the one thing that I want to be different is I want to make sure that the debug setting is set to true. So debug equal true. That's a Boolean value. Okay, that's good. So for right now, that's a difference that I want to make sure that I control at this point. Okay. All right. Now let's look at the production one. Okay. So let's copy the code from debug and let's edit production. Oh, not from debug, from development. And let's paste it in. So yeah, we do want to import from the base, right? But we want debug is equal to false in production. Okay, and that's a way to control that. Okay, what other things am I going to have to change in production? Well, as I mentioned before, it could be true that we could have a different database in development and in production. So maybe what I would do is I would take, if in fact that was the case, right? I would take base and I probably would refactor these such this database is variable, okay? I probably would just cut it out of the base and I would put two different versions, one into development and one into production. Okay, but I'm not going to do that. We're going to use the same approach to the database in both of them. So it's okay for it to be in base. Okay, but one thing that works in test that doesn't work in in production is this allowed host. I've got to populate this now. So let's go to production.py, and I'm going to just take this from my already baked version, and I'm going to say allowed hosts. Okay. So for instance, if I say we're in production, okay, if I say the debug is equal to false, all right, I can't even run this properly on PyCharm with the settings for production unless I say that it's okay for it to run in localhost or 127.0.0 at .1. The only reason that it's been working without us having these values in this allowed host list is that it doesn't pay attention to the list when debug is equal to true. Well, now that debug is equal to false, we need to be able to take care of these two, and then we need to have whatever the domain is going to be, whatever the host is going to be when we get it into production. So at Python Anywhere, it's going to be my ID, trainer1, that's my Python Anywhere user ID, .pythonanywhere.com. So those are the three things that I want in there. Okay. Is this going to do everything that I want it to do? Turns out it doesn't. Okay. It turns out that just moving the settings down into a module is going to cause some of the values that we currently have in base.py to be not appropriate for what we want to do. So when we go to test this, which we're going to do in a second, we're going to find out that when we refactored these files, we broke something. And of course, when you refactor things, you don't want to break anything. You haven't successfully refactored till you unbreak them. Okay. Well, let's look. So right now, our database is just in our overall directory. That's where it currently is. It's called db.sqlite3. Okay. Now, if we restart this, we're going to have trouble finding our database. Okay, but that's one step ahead of where we are right now. Okay, so let's stop the server. Okay, now what happens if we go to start the server and we don't tell it that we move the settings file? Well, we can say run server and it doesn't like that. Well, we moved the settings file. Okay, so how can you tell it where the settings file is? Well, there's a way to do it at the command line, and we're going to have to use that when we get to the production server. And for instance, what we do is we say -- settings, and then we point it to the proper settings file. Okay, but in PyCharm, you don't have to work that hard. Okay, we can go to the up to the menu, open up preferences. Okay, and there's a tab here for languages and frameworks, and we open up the Django subcategories, and it turns out that there is a place where we can point it to the settings file that we want to use And right now we're just taking the default, but let's explicitly set this. So we explicitly set this, okay, and let's just make sure we're in the right directory. So I'm in this project, and I'm down in this part, and I'm down within settings. And do I want to be in development or production? Well, I want to be in development. So let's open that. Okay. So now we have said, okay, in this PyCharm environment, when I start the server, use the settings that are the development settings. Okay. Well, that should fix the problem that we just had. Let's run server and see what we get. And it started the server, and that's pretty good. Okay, well, let's go look at our application and see if things are going to work. And you know what? Things are not working because when we're not finished with the refactoring of the settings files, because we moved them, some of the values that are set in the settings files, in particular right now, the one that says where to put the database, where to look for the database file or where to put it, it's now pointing at the wrong level of our file system hierarchy. Well, that doesn't look good. Where is it pointing to? Well, it's currently pointing too high. Okay, so it turns out that it is, let's go back and look at our, let's look at this directory. Now I have a directory called 2018 fall here. If I open it up, okay, it's supposed to have just this project in it. Now all of a sudden, okay, it has a database way up here that was created. It was created in 1017. Okay. All right. Well, that's the wrong place. It's too high. I want it down in here. So I wanted to be pointing to this already existing file. I've accidentally, because of the changes that I had, I'm accidentally pointing too high. So what do I want to do? Well, first of all, I want to get rid of that file. Okay, because I didn't really want that. Okay, now let's go find where it says the database is. Okay, and let me pause 1 second and I'll find that spot and we'll fix it. Okay, I found it. So it's part of the database's entry that we have here. And one of the things that we do is we give the name of the database, but actually implicitly we give the location. So we have a path expression here, okay? And we've got two levels of these dot slashes. And we can solve our problem by getting rid of one. That's all we do. All right. Okay, so let's stop our server. Let's restart our server. Sorry, that's not restarting our server at all. we restart our server with a run server. Okay, now look at this. We didn't pay attention to this the last time that we did the restart, but look what it does. It tells you the version of the server, and it says using settings, and it shows you the settings file that you're using. Now, it used to say that, but it used to point to the old settings file. So you can see that it's in the directory for our project. It's in the subdirectory for settings, and it's using development. That's what we want it to be using. Okay, so let's come up here. Let's fire up the application. And the application works. So apparently we're logged into Clerk. Right now, let's log out. Let's log in as the scheduler. And we can see the instructors. We still have all that test data. We can see the students. We still have all that test data. We're actually pointing to the real database file. So what we were doing before, just a few minutes ago, is we were pointing to the wrong part in our file system hierarchy. And when it didn't find the database, it created a new empty database file for us. Well, that wasn't what we wanted to do. Okay, so we've solved that problem. Very good. Okay. Now, we've created another problem, okay? And we're going to fix this while we're here. All right. Now, so far, we've been working on the development server in running under PyCharm, right? And our static files have been located in each of the apps themselves. So the static files for course info are in this static sub directory within course info. Okay, and you may have wondered why under static we have course info again, and the reason is that at a certain point we run a command which aggregates all the static files from all the apps, even the ones that we're borrowing from the Django distribution, like admin and things like that, and it collects them in a single spot in our project. And that allows us, when we move into production, that allows us to have our static files served by the HTTP server, by Apache, by Nginx, okay? When we're developing, we'll just let our development server do all the Django stuff and also serve the static files. That's fine. That's what people like to do for development. But for production, what we need is we need to collect up all the static files and put them in a good place in our project. And the place in our project where we want to be is usually inside this overall directory that's holding the project parts, okay, but not under course info, and not under this thing that holds the project settings and all that kind of stuff. We want it to be at the same level as these two, the same level as the database. Okay, well, how do we do that? Well, we do this. We under manage Pi, we just type in the command collect static. And it copied 123 static files. Now, we didn't have 123. We had, I don't know, 4 or 5. Where did the other ones come from? Well, they came from the admin app. Okay, they came from all these apps. So where did it get put? Did it get put up here where we wanted it to be? No, unfortunately, it did not. Okay. It would have if we'd run collect static before we moved the settings files. But unfortunately, we were having the same kind of problem with locating things within the hierarchy as we just did with our database, except that instead of it being too high, which is the database was, now it's too low. So if we open up this this thing that has our project settings, oh, now it's collected up all the static files here. Okay, so we've got the course info ones. Great, there are 4 of those. And then we have the admin ones, and there's a lot for that. We've got CSS, fonts, all kinds of stuff. Okay, so we have, hang on, let's not do that. So we have admin and course info. They're both right there. That's great, except that it built it in the wrong spot. The convention is we want this to be up under this. Okay. How do we fix that? Well, we fix that by going to the settings file, okay, and in base.py, okay, let's not make it too big, in base.py, down here in the bottom, okay, we have 2 things. One is we have a static URL. So this says, what's the URL that you use to find the static files? And it's static. And then the other says, well, where is it located? That's called the static root. And what we need to do is we need to move it higher. So how do we move it higher? Well, we move it higher by adding this time. Instead of subtracting a ... Now to move it higher, before when we wanted to move it lower, we subtracted a ... from the path. Now when we want to move it higher, we add one ... That's all we have to do. Okay? So we just say that this is up a level. Okay, so let's go back and let's find our current version where the static files are, and let's get rid of those. That's not where we wanted them to be. Let's delete them. Okay. All right. That's good. And let's go back and see if now, having changed the settings to get them just right, what happens if we say collect static again? Well, it says it copied 123, and where did they go? They went just where we wanted them to go, right here. Okay? So this is the conventional place to put your static files. Now, the fact is, it doesn't even have to be in your project. It could be in some other part of the file system entirely, right? All right, but here's where we typically want to put it. Okay, so when we came up with this new version of the settings files in their own directory and a hierarchy of them and all, we broke the position that it was using for the database, and now we fixed that, and we broke the position that it was using for collecting up the static files when we ask it to do it, and we broke that too. So now we fixed that. Okay, so and we've also tested the settings for development. Can we test the settings for production? Sure, we can. Okay, we can make sure that they work. How do we do that? Well, let's go up here to preferences. Okay, and I came right back to the Django panel because I was here just a little while ago. And let's point the settings file to production. Okay. Oh, before we do that, I just want to show you something. Oh, okay. So right now, when we start this, let's run server. Okay. So we run server. All right. And the settings that we're using are the development settings, including a debug equal true, right? So if we open the application, all right, what does it mean for debug to be equal to true? Well, several things, but one of the main things is if it gets a URL that it can't resolve, it gives you a very helpful, a very programmer-friendly error page. So let's just add something on the URL. Hi, Mom. Okay, so we get this page that says, well, this is kind of like a 404, but it's been intercepted by the development server. And it's telling us these are all of the URL paths that it looked through, and it couldn't find a match. Well, is this a page that we want to show to our users? No. Okay. It says you're seeing this because you have debug equal true. Change that to false, and Django will display a standard 404 page. Okay. Well, that's what we're going to do. So let's go back and let's stop the server. Okay. And let's go up and change our preferences so that we're pointing to the production settings. Okay, let's do that. And let's start the server again. Okay, so it's using the production file for settings. That's what we want. Okay, and debug should be set to false. So let's see how the application behaves. So we open up the application and it looks good. Okay, now let's add some weird URL to the end of that. You just get a not found page. Okay, so this is the behavior that we want in production. Now, is this a really polite version of a 404 not found page? No, some people actually create custom pages for their application, and you can configure that. Would that give you a more friendly version of this? But in our application, the only way to get to a 404 page is to be fooling up here in the address bar. Okay, if you are using the application as intended, you're never going to get a 404. So in terms of my sensibilities, if somebody is silly enough to type something on the end of one of our URLs and they get a not found page, that's okay. It doesn't have to be prettier as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so we've done it. Okay, we've refactored this thing and it's looking good. So that's the end of part one. I'll see you in part two. Bye bye.